I think we can go ahead and get started now. So in case anyone new has joined since 12, my name is Alyssa and
I'm Richard.
this is Richard, and we're the campus directors of the University of Pennsylvania Millennium Fellowship Campus Hub. And it is our great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar featuring Mr. J.P. Bilbrey, who is the former chairman and CEO of Hershey Company. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Bilbrey.
Yes, so for the next hour, we're going to engage in very meaningful discussion with Mr. Bilbrey and hear from your questions as all the Millennium Fellows. But before we dive into all of that, we're going to hear from one of our Millennium Fellows who has joined us today. His name is Nathan Tom. Nathan has been working on a project that's very in line with corporate social responsibility and food insecurity. And so we thought it'd be very appropriate to hear from him and just get an overview of what he's been doing down at the University of Arizona State University. So yeah, we just wanted to give the floor to Nathan for the first few minutes and hear from his project.
Oh, and also, as a reminder, we will have an open Q&A towards the end. So for the fellows in the audience, if you have questions that you would like to ask Mr. Bilbrey, feel free to type them out in the chat box and we'll keep track of them and then give you an opportunity to ask those questions in the open Q&A session. So great. With that, Nathan, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, Alyssa and Richard, thank you for the warm introduction. Greetings, everybody. My name is Nathan Tom. I'm coming to you from sunny Arizona during this nice, cool winter month, and I am the co-founder and executive director of the Culinary Collective Project, or the CCP. And to kind of give you an overview, the Culinary Collective Project, or the CCP, is a student-led research initiative aiming to provide resources to low-income ASU students combating food insecurity. And I guess the genesis of this initiative began with one burning question, and that is, why is food insecurity so drastically different in the state of Arizona? And so from what we know is that problems within food sustainability and food insecurity are incredibly specific to the regional characteristics and infrastructures. And that's exactly what we found to be the case in Arizona. We live in a food desert with a lack of access to nutritional and affordable food, but we also live in a literal geographic desert where typical solutions to food insecurity, such as community gardens or hydroponic systems, are just not as applicable. In addition, we live in a border state to Mexico and find that these struggling students often come from immigrant-rich communities that are historically disenfranchised and come from lower socioeconomic statuses. So because of these factors, I believe that the solutions that we wish to create as millennials and the way in which we wish to code switch to communicate to these communities must be drastically different than any current approach and has to involve corporate efforts as well. And so at ASU, the classic niches for combating food insecurity are being addressed by established organizations. But one area that is severely lacking within the food insecurity space is effective resource sharing between these established organizations and communities. And from our 10 weeks of research that we have so far conducted, we have found that students and communities want immediate, anonymous access to opportunities and resources, which is something that we were not exactly, which was a new demand that we did not currently meet. And so because of this, we're now switching our strategy to accommodate for this need. So now the Culinary Collective Project, we are looking to make our impact in the digital space by providing a digital platform for ASU students, affiliated organizations, and potentially corporate institutions to share knowledge, resource, and meaningful dialogue. And we plan to use programmers at ASU and our sponsored organization, which is the Obama Foundation, to craft this platform for Arizona and ASU specifically. And it's worth noting that we're in the very early stages of this digital development. But in these first 10 weeks, we feel we are confident that we've accurately identified the scope of food insecurity at Arizona State University. And we've created established relationships with student organizations, ASU administration, and we're looking to work with corporate institutions local to Arizona, such as PetSmart and Freeport McMoran, to really get the ball rolling on this. And so by doing this, we're garnering a comprehensive perspective on different levels at ASU and how they perceive food insecurity and how we can get everyone on the same page. And lastly, to close, I would just like to emphasize that, I'm in no way an expert on food insecurity. I'm just an ordinary student who wanted to turn my awareness into action. And I believe organizations like the Obama Foundation, like the UNAI, and the Millennium Campus Network are fantastic conduits for furthering and fostering youth leadership impact, and for giving us resources and opportunities like today to enter into a global community of leaders, but also to speak with people already in the field like JP. So it is wonderful to meet you, and I'm very happy to be a part of this webinar series to discuss food sustainability and corporate social responsibility. So thank you, Alyssa, Richard, and Noah, for giving me some time to spotlight my project. And I look forward to continuing this webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nathan. It's great to hear about your project. I think from Mr. Bilbrey's standpoint, it's very unique to hear from a student leader who's working at his own university, tackling food insecurity. So I think we're all very inspired by your project. If any of you guys want to reach out to Nathan, to discuss his project, you can find him on obviously the Millennium Fellowship website, crew, or any of our social platforms. So please reach out to Nathan if you have any other further discussions with him. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. And so now we're very excited to move on to our featured guest, JP Bilbrey. So to give you a brief introduction of his very lengthy achievements, Mr. Bilbrey is the former chairman, president, and CEO of the Hershey Company, and he has over 38 years of experience in consumer goods and worked in over 50 countries throughout North America, North Africa, the Middle East, as well as Asia. And Mr. Bilbrey is very well recognized for his corporate social responsibility achievements, in that specifically in 2014, he was named the most responsible CEO of the year by Corporate Responsibility magazine. And in 2016, he was awarded the Benjamin Botwinick Prize in Business Ethics by Columbia University. So before we go into a moderated conversation with Mr. Bilbrey, I would like to remind you again that to please enter your questions in the chat box for the open Q&A later on. So Richard, if you want to ask the first question.
Yeah. So the very first question we have for you, Mr. Bilbrey, is kind of a higher level question. I think the most important question to any project or endeavor or belief is why. And we want to know from you, why did you care about sustainability and corporate social responsibility from your early life or your midlife, or how did that develop? And how did you integrate that into the Hershey Company? I think we're just really interested in knowing where you come from, your beliefs, and why you started to care about social responsibility.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think it's really terrific that MCN and the United Nations has this program, and the Millennium Fellows. It's such a good, rich environment. I think for you guys to share with each other, that it's just a privilege to have a chance to spend some time with you, and hopefully we all take away something that will be beneficial. One of the things I talk a lot about is I ask people, what is it you believe in? And it sounds like a really simple question, but it really is much more complex in that it really tries to capture the principles and values and beliefs that you have as an individual. And if you're really clear with yourself about what you believe in, then it's going to guide you in so many ways. So when I was growing up, I grew up in a family that, my parents had benefited from migrating, if you will, from the north central Tennessee in a very rural, poor area out to Arizona. So Nathan, I grew up in Arizona at a time that the state looked quite different than it does today. But at any rate, I would say that, we had a modest upbringing. My dad always said we may not have everything we want, but we had everything we need. And I think that set the culture, if you will, of the environment I was in. You know, we all come from different walks in life in different parts of the country, but I was fortunate enough, I grew up in a faith-based environment, and so it was central to our family to think about, you know, what was our role in all, not only in our family, our community, and life, etc. And so I think I had a foundation that caused me to think about these kinds of things. And then as I grew as a young adult and started experiencing the world in a very different way, I continued to say, hey, what is it I really think is important? What is it I believe in? How will I grow up in the world that I interact with? And I was fortunate at Procter & Gamble, where I started after I got out of school, that it was a company that put a lot into you in terms of training and development. And therefore, people were investing in me, helping me to be more than I was as I started my own journey. And then I had the realization that as my roles changed, and sometimes I didn't understand this at first, but as my roles changed and as I had greater impact and authority, it also gave me the opportunity then to exercise what it was I believed. And so whether that was in how I treated people, how people who worked for me, the environment I wanted, and sometimes if you're the boss, so to speak, regardless of your level of in an organization, you have the opportunity to create an environment that may be even better than the one you're experiencing above you. And you ought to take that opportunity to take what it is you believe in and make it possible for others. And of course, we're making a large assumption here that what you believe in is good. And I would make that assumption with this group, just knowing what you're involved in, that what you believe is probably good and more holistic than not. And so you have to you have to take those opportunities and passions. And so I really break it into three things that I would come back to in this question that's fundamental. First, what is it you believe? So you have to be clear with yourself what that is. And then I always tell people, find your own voice, because we all have a different voice. You know, a lot of times in the corporate world, people will talk about what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. Well, look, we all have weaknesses, right? And we all have strengths. And what I tell people is listen, don't obsess over what you're not. Try to make sure those things don't become obstacles for you, but you'll probably never master totally those things that some people may call your opportunity areas or your weaknesses. But your strengths are probably towering in some way. And so I always look to say, how can I help someone realize the full potential of their strengths, and then help them own not allowing these other opportunity areas to become obstacles. And that's really all you have to do. So I would tell you, don't have anxiety over the things you're not, and really believe in that voice that you have that's unique to you. Learn from others, don't try to be others. It's a very simple sort of thing. Maybe your mother told you the same thing at some point along the way, but you know, you are who you are. And these are the gifts that God gave you to leverage. And so I would encourage you to recognize what those are. And then the next piece, which we're all involved with, which is thinking about what is it that we want to do. You have to learn to love the hard work of the passion and ideas that you have. Because the fact is, no matter how good the mission, it's still going to be hard work. But if you look at it as something that's so difficult to overcome, it makes the journey not so great. And we all know that the journey lasts a lot longer than the end. And so you have to really think about, how do I have passion for this work, regardless of the obstacles, regardless of how hard it becomes, because it comes back to this central thing of, what do I really believe in? And if you understand what that is, then the power of your voice becomes so significant that you'll recognize the things that you want to work on, those that could ultimately be a distraction for you. And so to me, that simple framework allows you over the course of a long period of time to be able to capture those things that are important. And I didn't have the same influence at the beginning of my career as I did at the end of my career, but that's okay. Because earlier in your career, a lot of the things that you do are much more like a transaction. Because there's requirements. I always used to say in every job has an economic viability or an economic assignment. And part of that is just the transaction. Someone pays you, you do some work. As your career grows, or as your impact grows, what you find is that becomes less of a transaction, much more about leadership, and then also much more about choice. And I think what happens to a lot of people is they forget that they have a choice to make a difference. And as your impact grows, I come back to this central idea of what do I believe, you then will make the choices that derive significant impact. And one of the things, and then I'll turn it back to you guys, but one of the things that happens in a corporate environment, certainly, or in a political career, whatever one's choice is that as that influence grows, you also have this opportunity of choice. But success, sometimes people will say, oh, well, the only thing that drives a corporation is profit. Well, it's really not true. But profit enables choice, because that allows you to take a healthy environment and then direct the efforts of the organization, not only against its core mission as an enterprise, but also its social mission as a member of a larger community that they can have impact against.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that personal experience with us. And you already sort of touched upon this, but it's clear that for all the people who are present here today, we care about sustainability and we care about corporate social responsibility.
Sure.
However, from a traditional business standpoint, this might not be as an evident or shared value among all, and it might not even be a priority or a necessity for a company. So then how do you justify these corporate social responsibility related initiatives to your board, and how do you work to convince your business partners and maybe even donors or internal employees that this is a shared responsibility?
Yeah, I think so first of all, I think we're very fortunate that we're in an era where the differences between private enterprise, social enterprise are much more blurred than they ever were before. So whether that happened intentionally or unintentionally, your generation has been extremely influential in saying, hey, here are some things we care about. We don't not only care about the product, but we care about where it came from, how it was made, who touched it, was it ethical? All of these things, I think, have progressed us in a way that's very good for us. So I think a lot about common interest, and I think that common interest has made it much more in the interests of enterprise to be more socially connected maybe than companies were 50 years ago, and on some level less selfish maybe than they were because of transparency in the world. So, today, if you think about the availability of information and data, and you can look at the whole world where before you couldn't. I like to give the examples that when I was getting out of school, I said, okay, one of the things I want to do is I want to read all the Harvard classics. And so I said, wow, this is really good. So then I went to say, okay, if I want to do that, how much does it cost? And just even started buying 1, 2, 3, 4 books or something. It was something that I couldn't afford. So I've always been an active learner, a lifetime learner. I'm a voracious reader, but it was just something I couldn't afford. Today, you can go online and get an app of all of these classics, and for like $2, you have access to an entire library of information, and it doesn't matter where you live, right? So this common interest, this transparency, this accessibility, I think has held all of us to be much more accountable than we ever have had to be before. And then I think what's changing is you have a generation of people that want to be more connected and share amongst this common interest of social responsibility. So for me, the change in the environment and the mindsets and who consumers are really drives a lot of these things. And you guys should take a lot of credit for that, because I think you're one of the first generations that would say, hey, this is central to how I want to make decisions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think one of the things that we've been thinking about while you were saying all these insights is, we know you've been involved throughout your entire career in so many different sectors, be it, obviously the for-profit, corporate, nonprofit, governmental. And we're wondering, throughout all of these sectors, how does social impact differ? Like from the nonprofit sector or the governmental sector, how does that differ from how you practice corporate social responsibility, in the private sector? And are there any stark differences that made you, stick with Hershey throughout the years, or are there things that are different that you wish you went back to, and say like the nonprofit sector, things like that?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think there's a continuum from awareness to action, and everybody may play a different role there. So I had the benefit of working in my career not only in North America, a very mature market, but I also worked in developing markets, emerging markets. And so if you think about the time frame of which I had a career, I really kind of caught the wave of globalism. And so it gave me the opportunity to experience a number of these, these different things. I think if usually somewhere there's a pioneer who becomes aware of an issue. And then there's an important role, I think, with NGOs and other groups or individuals or small consortiums of people that say, hey, this is a really important effort that I have now recognized. As that progresses, I think there's a natural maturation rate of how each of us can impact those different maturation or ways to impact these unique different ideas. And so private interest may play a role all the way through public interest. And then, of course, there's things that are more relevant to some than they are relevant to others. And I think if you think about it that way, it enables you to think. It's just like you have the 17 things that you guys are working on. I look at every one of those and they're important, but every one of those won't be relevant to the same constituents as maybe they are to others. And so I think all of that plays a role. And I don't think it can be one without the other. I think I used to say this a lot when I was talking to the organizations I ran, that our success isn't about any one of us, it's about all of us. And I would say, as you think about this continuum of awareness to action, our success won't be about any one of us, it'll be about all of us as it relates to that total continuum.
Yeah, I cannot agree with you more that it really takes action from all the different institutions as well as the different groups in society to really make a difference. And so as we wrap up the moderated portion of the webinar, I wanted to pose another final question, which is, so what advice do you have for the 530 Millennium Fellows who are all working towards promoting the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, especially for those who are interested in maybe pursuing social impact from the private sector?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I'll relate this to my own family a little bit, I think that you have to decide, one, what's interesting to you, two, where do you believe you can take your time, your treasure, or your talent. And if you think about those three things, you'll have different sizes of buckets, if you will, of those three. Sometimes you have more time than you have treasure, and other times you'll develop talents in unique areas that can have an impact. For my family, we have developed an interest in children's health issues, women in crisis, and then education. And so when we think about how to use our time and treasure, we use that as our filter of how we're going to allocate what we believe our resources allow us to do. I would encourage you to think about it similarly. Is there one thing that you feel as though you can bring the uniqueness of time, treasure, and talent to? Are there 3 things? Whatever. But none of you will be able to do all 17 of these things, but together you'll get all 17 done, but probably each of you will play an important role in maybe 1 or 2 of them. And I just think over time, that's something that you have to think about, is where you're really going to put your efforts. I know in business, I always used to tell my board of directors, I say, look, here are the 2 or 3 things that I'm going to really focus on. Put that in the bank. I'm going to do everything humanly possible to deliver against that. And items 4 through 10, I'll find the right people to be champions of those things, but I can't do 10 things. I can only do 2 or 3 things. And I think that that's something I would just encourage you to think about as you also think about, what do I believe in? What's important to me? Where do I want to give the gifts that I have against the things that are important?
Awesome. So that concludes our questions to Mr. Bilbrey, and we're going to jump into hopefully the more exciting portion for you all, and that is all the fellows for all the questions from the Millennium Fellows. So our first question, I want to allow Aaron LaCourse from Arizona State University to ask it. Aaron, if you can please unmute yourself and simply repeat your question for Mr. Bilbrey, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, you were.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Aaron can't talk on his computer, so I'll just repeat his question for him. So basically, Aaron LaCourse is a student from Arizona State University, and he was wondering, many companies have developed corporate social responsibility departments, but at least for now, they tend to be difficult to get jobs in because of their size. How would you, Mr. Bilbrey, suggest someone in college to position themselves for a promotion into these departments? And how would you suggest we position ourselves for promotions in general?
Yeah, so let me take the first part of that. So it is true, I think, that in many companies, as you think about this whole area of social responsibility and community communication, et cetera, they do tend to be relatively small organizations. But the way that I would encourage you to think about it, I've given this advice to young graduates that have come into the Hershey Company. I said, look, first of all, develop a domain expertise in the business that you're in. And so there's nothing wrong with joining the business literally in any function. It could be finance, it could be sales, marketing, engineering, whatever. And as you then have an understanding of the company, the business, and have this domain expertise, as I like to refer to it, then it allows you to get involved in areas that you're bringing an area of expertise, as well as passion for helping the company expand its own awareness and impact in those particular areas. So that I wouldn't, it's fine to say, listen, I have a passion for social impact, here's my topic or my focus. But I think what you'll find is it's hard to have the impact you may want without some of the domain expertise. So I think it's fine to enter the business as a general business interest, certainly communicating that you have this other area of interest as well. And that probably would encourage the company, and this happens quite frequently, is you would get almost an internship of multiple roles that give you a good understanding of the company. And then after 2 or 3 years, you may then say, hey, how I really want to spend my time is up against some of these special programs in this particular area. And I think as we go forward in time, these efforts will become larger inside of organizations, because I think it becomes synonymous with how businesses operate and think and behave and so on.
Great, thank you. The next question is asked by Saad Razak. Saad, if you're on the call, would you be able to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mr. Bilbrey. Thank you once again for joining us. I'm one of the campus directors from Concordia University. My name is Saad Razak, and Damien's also a campus director at Concordia University. We're working on this project to try to destigmatize mental health and try to raise a goal to try to support a local organization that's working on, providing support for children that are targeted by mental illnesses. The question I had for you, I wanted to know first of all how you decided to transition from your work at Procter & Gamble. I noticed you did about 20 or so years at Procter & Gamble. How did you decide to transition from that to the Hershey Company?
So there was a lot of interference with your during your speaking. So I'll talk. I heard perfectly the last part you said. So I'll at least tackle that, and hopefully that will help you. Actually, this life happens to all of us as we go along, and I actually had spent 22 years at Procter & Gamble, half of it in the U.S., half of it outside the U.S. We were living in Asia at the time, and one of my kids was struggling, is the fact. And we said nothing's more important to us than our family. And my wife and I made the decision to leave corporate work and go back to America. And so I actually took about 2 years away from my corporate life, and we focused on one of our kids in particularly, and the support for him is a part of our family. So I have to tell you, it had absolutely zero professional planning, but it was one of those times when you say, again, what do you believe in? What are your principles? What are your values? And of course, our family was extremely important to us, and so we made that decision. When I went back to doing corporate work, and we felt things were on the right track, literally I picked up the phone and I called a half a dozen people I knew that were running companies or doing things, and I really missed what I was doing, but at the same time my wife and I were willing to take whatever time was required to nurture our family. And what I found was, I have to tell you, I was quite shy and scared about how people would receive me. When I told my story, everyone I spoke to wanted to help me. And that's how I went back to work, first for Danone, the French group, running the water division, where I was president and CEO there. And then we did a divestiture of those businesses, and I participated in breaking those apart. And that's when I went to work for the Hershey Company. But these are the things when you follow in life what it is you believe. Excuse me. Kitty. So my guard dog retired when I retired, but he didn't get the same memo I got. So he's still there. But at any rate, that's really what led to that transaction. So, the thing that I really knew about, my core competencies, of course, were being a corporate guy, an executive, whatever. And so I had that to pursue, but my beliefs are what really guided the choices that we made as a family.
Great. So the next question we have is posed by Teresa from Spelman College, which is in Atlanta, I believe. So her question is, she would like to know the best ways to push for difficult programs. So, for example, how might Teresa, given that she has a stable job at a corporate office like Hershey, push for the company to start producing fair trade chocolate? In other words, what she's asking is, how would she push for something that most will give a pushback to?
So I think that in all of these things, if they can be intrinsically linked to what it is the company does or a piece of the company. So some of you may have read in our background some of the programs that the Hershey Company had in the cocoa growing regions of West Africa. Certainly it becomes more simple to talk about and advocate for ideas that have to do with the businesses that companies are in. And if you can link then the purpose of the company and the purpose of the activity that you're interested in a course that is an important way to think about how to further those types of ideas. Also, companies do a lot of programs that are important to the employees of the company. And so if the idea that you have is also intrinsically a good idea, compassionate idea, one that helps further, whether it's around consumers or community, whatever it might be, then that's also a way to ask for and allocate money. I've done that before in my career where I went to my board and I said, listen, I have an idea. I think it potentially could be good. I think we can do it for X amount of money and I'll be accountable for it. And if you'll support me in this, we'll give it a try. Obviously, as the CEO, you probably have an easier starting point to do those things maybe than in other parts of the organization. But as a CEO, I always actively listened and supported those types of programs that came up through the organization that seemed to also be important to us and the communities that we worked in.
Awesome, thank you very much. So our next question comes from Tolani Oladipo. I'm not quite sure what school he is from, but Tolani, if you are on the chat and able to talk, can you please unmute yourself and propose your question?
I'm afraid we're not able to hear you. So I think you are unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you can figure out a way to connect to the webinar, feel free to just unmute yourself and start talking. But as of right now, I think Richard can go ahead and ask your question on your behalf.
Yeah, so Talani's question, Mr. Bilbrey, is Talani is from Africa, and he said, due to Africa's run from investing in deep scientific research that are usually industry-oriented, how do young individuals like himself with interests in corporate social responsibility or social impact in general stir interest in the corporate society if we're in our position of just like young college students who are passionate about a certain issue?
So I guess the way I would think about it is, several possibilities. I mean, one, it could be through internships, with companies. It could be, participating in other types of some of these competitions and things around, innovation and ideas. And then the other is just getting yourself connected via communicating directly with some of those organizations. Now, none of those are perfect answers, I would tell you, and I don't think there's a silver bullet here. But what I would also tell you is aim high in the organization. When I was a CEO, whether it was a kid in the 4th grade who was sending me a note for a class project, or whether it was a university student saying, hey, who could I talk to about this idea that I have? I answered all of those. I say I answered all of them. I'm sure there were some I didn't answer. So if you sent me something and I didn't respond, I apologize. My habit was to answer every one of those that I possibly could. And so, I think there's a lot of ways there, but I don't have a perfect response for how to, do that from the time you're a student. When I was involved in this organization, Enactus, it was a great environment for university students to reach business leaders. And I always thought that was just such an interesting environment, just as the environment, we're experiencing, here today. Each of these kinds of things, I think, helps you build your voice and to be heard.
Yeah, so I think it's, like you said, very important to always think about what we could do as our part to create change. And so I think this translates well to the next question that is posed by Joanne. Joanne Tomeo from Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia in the United States. Joanne, if you're on the call, can you please unmute yourself to ask your question?
Hello, hi. My name is Joanne Tamayo, again from Georgia Tech. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and putting this all together. I guess my question, don't know how to best word it, but it would be, how do you find the balance between the most like for-profit versus like the most social impact, especially from like a corporate standpoint, and how like are those two pathways counterintuitive, or how they can work together, and especially finding that balance from a standpoint, from a leadership standpoint?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that it doesn't have a perfectly straightforward answer, but I think again it comes back to what is in the interest of the company and that company's connectivity to the community and the particular issue at hand. And I think they're going to have different balance at different times. I'll give you an example of something I experienced and it didn't work, but sometimes that's the best. That's the best example to learn by. We always hear about the things that work so well. But in the company that I was running, we had an aging workforce, and we had really good manufacturing jobs. And those jobs, of course, were becoming more sophisticated over time. But the starting salaries for those jobs were really good. And that was in Hershey. Next door to Hershey is Harrisburg. Harrisburg has a very high unemployment rate, and it also has a very high unemployment rate amongst a very specific economic strata that exists within the city of Harrisburg. And so one of the ideas I had is I encouraged our manufacturing folks to say, listen, let's go talk to the school system. Let's put in place an apprentice program. In that apprentice program, we will not only put it inside the school, but when it comes time to graduate from high school, we will provide people with very good jobs. And I said, let's put in mind that we're going to change the economic development of this area, one house, one street, one community at a time. That was sort of the marketing of the whole idea. And we would literally send a bus to pick people up for work in the morning, because a lot of the people we're talking about didn't have access to good transportation to get to work. So we would train them, we would get them to work, we would give them the job. And these are good jobs. I mean, these jobs were all starting at, call it $20 an hour and up. Some of them were union jobs, some of them were non-union jobs, doesn't matter. And we could not convince the school system to do it because it impacted the federal dollars that they were going to get. And so the reaction was, well, we don't want to lose on this hand, and yet how would we do it on that? And we said, well, look, this is private enterprise and social enterprise working together as a community to provide both training and jobs, et cetera. We went to a more rural area in another part of Pennsylvania where we have manufacturing, and we were able to implement part of this whole program, because there was just somebody that said, oh yeah, I'll do that. That's good. That's good for the community, good for me. We'll just do that. And so I was so disenchanted that I thought this was such an easy to do idea, and it ended up being difficult to do in what I thought would have been the best place to do it. But we were able to do it in another area that I think the company, even though I'm not there anymore, I think the company is still learning their way and doing essentially what the original idea was. But I think that you have to probably go more than halfway on these things, and I thought in this case we were going more than halfway, and we just needed somebody to meet us, but we weren't able to make it work. But I don't think the idea was wrong. I don't know if the timing was wrong or what. But I think that it takes everybody. This saying, it takes a village to raise a kid. I think that's really true. But it takes a kind of a village of like-minded people to make some of these things come true. And you're just not always going to find it. I mean, that's just part of life is that, sometimes you're going to skin your knees and you just have to get back up and, okay, say, how does this go? And I think that's an important thing for us to realize. is a lot of times your idea and your passion and your love for what it is you're trying to do is absolutely correct. However, whether it's timing, whether it's place, you just don't know. You may fail 10 times on the way to getting it right, but you should never lose sight of A, learning why it's not working, but B, you may have the right idea just at the wrong time.
Awesome. So our next question it segues pretty nicely because it comes from Gonzalo. I'm not sure if his full name, but it says Gonzalo's iPhone. So Gonzalo, if you are here, please unmute yourself and talk if you can.
Oh, I think it's Ivar.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, it's Ivar Gonzalez, my second name. So I'm Ivar Guerrero from Lynn University here in Boca Raton. So if you come from winter, right now it's very good. So my hello, Mr. Bilbrey, sorry. So my question is, like, knowing that there's so many different points of views, and I think sometimes we can be biased towards something. What is the best way, or like in your experience, the best way to make a decision, like a very objective decision?
Obviously, it's a very interesting and important question. I had a boss one time that told me that with every decision you should make, you should challenge yourself and demonstrate to others that you've been thoughtful and balanced. So what I mean by thoughtful is not caring, but I mean thoughtful as in, did I consider a number of different things? Was I rational and open-minded in my thoughtfulness around the decision? And then was I balanced that there may be more than one answer? When I was young, I thought that there was value to your ability to make a decision quickly and demonstrate, that you had all of this knowledge. And I know, almost like a contest where you hit a buzzer. Somebody asks a question and I would think, okay, how quick I could hit the buzzer with the right answer was really important. And what I learned is that over time, what's really important is this concept of being thoughtful and balanced. And imagine that if the two of us were working with each other and I'd asked you to run a business, many time zones away from where I was sitting, what I'd want to know is that, are you thoughtful and balanced in your considerations of how you make decisions? I'd be far less concerned about, do you know the answer in advance because you're so smart? I'd really want to know, are you so smart that you can recognize the journey to find the right answer? And so that's just something I would leave with you that maybe helps you think about the question you have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we only have time for one more question, but thank you so much for everyone submitting your great questions. We just have so many and limited time that I'd like to turn it back to Nathan. Nathan, if you're on the call, could you unmute yourself to ask your question?
Yeah, of course. Hi, JP. I think that my question also segues with the journey of finding the right answer. And so to just kind of put it in context for all of us young leaders, this is very much the genesis of our social impact journey, I think. And so I think that using corporations to kind of catalyze that journey to make that impact is something that we're all very passionate about. So one thing that I think we realize often more than not is that our efforts are more short-term, or that it falls that way. But I was wondering, from your experience, what can corporations and companies do within their established sphere of influences to take social impact a step further, to create not just short-term impact, but intergenerational change?
When I worked for the French group Danone, at the time, the chairman of the board was a guy by the name of Franck Rabou. And he used to talk a lot about social commerce. So not philanthropy, not corporate only, but the concept of social commerce. And what I really liked about that is it was about doing good and doing well, which is a comment Milton Hershey used to say. If you do good, you can also do well. And I think from a sustainability standpoint, one of the observations that I've had is when you get the right partnerships between all of these different entities that bring value. So you've got the Gates Foundation, you got private enterprise, you may have government NGOs, or you may have NGOs, you may have government organizations. When those things come together, it's much more holistic, I think, and sustainable. Without the commerce piece, I don't think it's as sustainable. And so social commerce for me is a really important concept, because it then works in perpetuity. And if you ever get a chance to read about the Hershey Company and our founder, Milton Hershey, he really did create a engine of social commerce, of the school that, the Milton Hershey School, the company, the foundation. So just very quickly to give you a sense of time and value of money, in 1920 or so, he put $60 million, which by the way was a lot of money today, and it was a whole lot of money back in the 1920s. But the combination of the company and his initial investment has grown to $14 billion that we have to run a school for disadvantaged kids. So one of the things a lot of people don't know about the Hershey Company is the social commitment we have to disadvantaged kids in the school, that we have about 2,000 kids in the school. Rather than me take you through it, because I know we're running out of time, you could certainly go read about it, and it would just give you a sense of the power you guys have as smart young people, because you have your intelligence, you have time, you have the ability to create something that is so huge that nothing is impossible. Literally nothing is impossible. And so, since we're getting ready to close, I'm just going to come back again and say the very thing that I, open with, and, make sure you know what you believe. Find your own voice, because it's the greatest gift that you have. And then love the hard work of making all your dreams come true. And that's what I'll leave you with.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, and Mr. Bilbrey, for the amazing questions and answers. And thank you for taking the time to share your experiences with us, to kind of guide us to understand what corporate social responsibility is and what responsibility our generation holds for the future. And so I think there's a burning question that we all would like to ask you, is that in the spirit of post-Halloween, what is your favorite Halloween Hershey candy?
Well, I have two favorites, Hershey's with almonds and Payday bars. I love those. But the number one selling item for the Hershey Company is Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Reese's Peanut Butter Cups by themselves, those little 2 cups, that's a $2.6 billion business by themselves.
Wow, great. I'm sure there's a lot of controversy out there about what the best chocolate is, but it certainly was our pleasure to hear from you and to hear from you yourself to say what your favorite chocolate is. And so to wrap up the webinar, the fellows would love to keep in touch with you. So if there is a channel of communication through which we can contact you, if you could please write it out in the private chat box, since this is a publicly recorded and shared webinar video. Feel free to please insert your email address or something like that in the private chat box. And if you also have any social media accounts that you would like to share with us, that would be great as well. So thank you so much for the amazing talk. It was very insightful and inspiring, most of all. And so I would also like to thank all the Millennium Fellows across the world for joining the webinar today. And I hope you were all able to gain some great insights. And we look forward to your participation in our next webinar, which is going to feature Wendy Kopp, the CEO of TFA Teach for All, on Friday, November 9th at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can RSVP by emailing www.millenniumfellows.org.
You guys are like oxygen for me. Thank you very much, and God bless each and every one of you.
Great. Thank you so much. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.